Welcome to your key discovery point. I am Brett Burney from Nextpoint, joined by Doug Austin of eDiscovery today. Doug, many people probably know that right now there is a project going on called the EDRM 2.0 project. I've been honored to be a trustee on that project, and you have attended many of our calls over the last, almost 2 years now, I think. And when we've put a lot of votes out, people talking about which boxes should go where. Do we add boxes? Do we take away boxes? Do we reorganize the boxes? There's been a lot of discussion, and it's really been fantastic just because we've been able to get so many insights and different approaches on this. But one of the big discussions, as you know, has been this intersection or this interaction or this partnership between information governance and eDiscovery. Several years ago, the EDRM hosted the information governance reference model. So that was the whole thing. That's what you see, that little beautiful colored wheel over on the far left of the current EDRM. But you proposed an interesting approach just a few days ago here about how that real relationship should look between the EDRM and the IGRM.
Yeah, and so a little background. I had been thinking about this idea for some time, and then Maureen Holland put out a LinkedIn post where she really, I think, tried to focus on the idea about data being, involved in a lot more. And the graphic was a
she had a lovely picture.
The graphic was a little thought-provoking, which was part of my, response being kind of like, well, let's draw the line here, correctly, because, when we think of eDiscovery and what have you, one of the things I've been on the soapbox for a couple of years now is people equate it with litigation. And of course, eDiscovery, came into being because of litigation. But eDiscovery is about a lot more than litigation today. It's about investigations and audits and privacy requests and HSR second requests, and incident response and so forth. These are all, workflows and use cases that can benefit by eDiscovery technology and workflows.
Right.
So, that's one of the things I tried to say. Having said that, however, I do think Maureen has a very valid point in that, we don't want to try to apply eDiscovery processes to things that it shouldn't be. And one of the things that I think we have to do is kind of think about the relationship between information governance and eDiscovery. Now, when the EDRM model first came about, there was no anything. It basically started with identification. Ultimately, then they added a box that said information management.
Exactly. Yes.
Circle that said information governance.
That's right.
And then finally put the IGRM model in there. And one of the things that I think has been key to that is it has focused or forced legal and eDiscovery professionals to focus on the fact that a strong information governance program is key to eDiscovery success.
Yes.
But when we think about and when we look at that model, IGRM being kind of at the start, that's really not where it really fits. In essence, eDiscovery is contained within the IGRM. And one of the things I've kind of said is, hey, if you really want to get down to it, and if you go zooming into the IGRM middle of the model, where basically, where you start from data being created and received through the processes there to eventually data being disposed at the end of the life cycle of data. In essence, what I said is you take that use box, and at least from an eDiscovery standpoint, that's where eDiscovery fits.
Right.
And of course, I had to basically take an EDRM model and extract out the IGRM, which I did with the old model because it was a little easier to do as the primary colors. But in essence, that's what I was really trying to say is when it really comes down to it, the eDiscovery lifecycle is in that use box. Now you could say, well, it's also protect and transfer and to some degree retain, but regardless, it's in that middle section. That's where eDiscovery technically belongs. Of course, we're not going to put it there in an actual model because it just wouldn't make sense and it would be too hard to see. But the one thing I think is important to note is there is an interrelationship, and that's why I'm a proponent of keeping the IGRM model in the model, because I think it's important to reinforce the importance of InfoGov to the success of eDiscovery. So that's
Right.
kind of one of the things I thought I would do to say, hey, this is really where it fits, but we should keep the interrelationship, kind of prominent within the EDRM model.
I always enjoyed these discussions, and thank you, Maureen, for posting this. And I mean, I don't remember how many comments, well, 44 comments, but I think in counting, even Maureen was a little surprised. It looks like from her comment here that she got as big of a response when it comes to this. The one thing that grabbed me on this is the idea that she says we, at least in the e-discovery specific industry, we think of data as legal data, but she says it isn't. Data is business data first. I absolutely agree with that. I mean, it's only until, like she says here, only becomes legal data when there's a legal risk that escalates into this, which I fully agree. And then at that point, maybe is that when you shift over into the EDRM from the IGRM, if that's kind of the way that I sort of always thought about it and discussed about it. Now, I will say, if I'm not mistaken, Maureen is an e-discovery professional at a very large pharmaceutical company. And so it would make sense that this is her specific focus, and it should be, right? Because when you're looking at data internally, like the IGRM, I think does a good job of talking about, IT at a corporation looks at data from an efficiency standpoint, right? We just want to make sure that email works. Whereas the business people look at data from a business standpoint, like what does this tell us? We're looking for business. That's what we're here for. Whereas legal and maybe records information managers at a corporation are looking at it from a risk standpoint, right? And I think the IGRM does a fantastic job of kind of showing those relationships there. But internally, that is what you're thinking about it then at that point. The only thing that I would say is if you're looking at it from that corporate standpoint, Doug, I think all of Maureen's comments are exactly on point, but there are instances where, outside law firms are not necessarily involved in information governance practices. I think that they should be. I think that's a good value add for a lot of outside law firms, but they only maybe get it when it's kind of thrown over the fence, right? It's like somebody internal at a corporation or an organization collects the data because they've been managing it as it goes from all of these, risk and efficiency and business standpoint. And then at some point, then they turn it in. And that's where Maureen, I think, is talking about turning it into a legal risk and doing the EDRM there. So I still see where there are some differences in the way that we look at some of the data. Maybe this would be for like smaller individuals, for example, plaintiffs, for example, that don't necessarily have an information governance model. They don't even think about that. And so it may start at the collection side, from that EDRM. But those were just some of the thoughts that I was thinking. Although I love how you kind of put the EDRM, squeezed it into that, that square peg into the round hole there of IGRM into helping people understand, like, it really is certainly in big corporate civil litigation that's a good place for it to fit.
Right. Well, and really, when you think about it, I mean, regardless who you are, I mean, you don't necessarily, obviously, individuals aren't going to have a formalized information governance policy, but they are going to, there's going to be a life cycle of creating or receiving data all the way through disposing of data and usage of it. That may include eventually an eDiscovery usage if they're involved in litigation or what have you. So to me, that's one of the things that, kind of makes it fit there. And absolutely, I think Maureen's, on point with all her comments there. One of the things, though, I will mention is that, it would be, while you want to recommend that the data is business data first, you also want to recommend that, or you want to recognize that you want to be prepared for what may come along. And when she says legal risk escalates, legal is one of the stakeholders of the IGRM. Right. Only one out of seven, but there's still one. Right. And so obviously as a good IG program considers potential legal needs as a part of that. So to me, that's one of the things that makes the IGRM, important is the idea that, it is really meant to be the stakeholder groups that represent the business overall. Right. And, one of those is legal. And that, of course, then ties it to potentially in many cases to to the EDRM or eDiscovery because legal use cases include eDiscovery use cases, and that's where the relationship ties in. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
And at the very end here, you even just say, like, before the IG circle and the IGRM model was added, legal people, and I think you're meaning like mostly like outside counsel or law firms, private practitioners, they were not focused
Legal
really on that.
professionals, yeah.
Legal
Yeah.
professionals, okay, they weren't focused on that big picture of data governance and the best practices, and that has certainly changed. And even today we have things like Preserve in Place, and we have tools that, I mean, you could even do a review. I mean, to some extent, you could even do a review in Microsoft Office 365. And some people keep it all in there, and they don't maybe turn it over or collect it and separately do this. So I recognize all of that, and certainly we're just seeing sort of some of the industry aspects change on there. But for now, my friend, you are still proposing that we keep the IGRM in the EDRM model, similar maybe to the way that it looks right now.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that while, because one of the things I was thinking is the IGRM it's circular because it's supposed to be perpetual, and
Right,
technically
right.
it's around the eDiscovery or the EDRM model, but putting it at the beginning kind of makes it establishes it as the foundation to to eDiscovery best practices. So yeah, I'm definitely, and obviously we're down the home stretch to
Yes.
the draft EDRM 2.0 model that will be proposed out to the general public. I'm one who's kind of going on the record to say let's keep the IGRM model in there because I think it's important to illustrate to folks the importance of information governance.
Very good. But I would just tell people, don't stop thinking about this relationship between InfoGov and eDisco, like information governance and eDiscovery. I know that a lot of people are thinking about that quite a bit, but I don't want to stop thinking about that because I think it will continue to evolve, to your point, like we're seeing right now with EDRM 2.0. We're trying to at least encapsulate where a lot of that thought process is right now. So that's your key discovery point. Continue to think about that relationship between information governance and electronic discovery. I would just say, if this is a little bit new to you and wondering about the EDRM, I'll just throw out quickly that if you go to nextpoint.com/book, we had co-written a book with Tom O'Connor, a longtime eDiscovery consultant that I know you work with quite a bit, Doug, on some of the webinars at EDRM, but we go through and explain pretty much all of those little processes there. So if you wanted to go and try to look up a book or get some more information, go to nextpoint.com/book. Thanks as always, Doug, and we'll talk with you next time.
All right. Thanks, Brett. Thanks, everybody.